All right, welcome everyone that's watching the show live and the recording in the future. You're now watching the Geo Show, and Learn Around the World's programs are interactive programming. So that means you can interact with our live program today using Kahoot and also using Twitter. And then after the show today and the rest of the week, you can continue the learning about Abraham Lincoln, young Abraham Lincoln, over at Flipgrid. So if you're going to use Twitter during the show today, make sure you use hashtag GeoShow. Again, that's hashtag GeoShow. I am not following my Twitter handle, only the hashtag. If you're playing along using Kahoot today, make sure you go to kahoot.it, type in that game pin 430452, again 430452, and that will link you right up to our Kahoot game. Enter in a school appropriate nickname and you're all set up to win possibly a postcard from me, GOB, from the Learn Around the World Studios. Also, you can go to flipgrid.com/GeoShow for the rest of the week and continue the learning. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get the show started. So here we go. Geo Show is now live. All right. Welcome, all explorers. You are now watching the Geo Show USA series. And today's show is Young Lincoln before he was president. Today's show is brought to you by Learn Around the World. And today's game pin is 430452. Again, 430452 if you're playing along using Kahoot. Don't worry if you're not logged in just yet. You'll have time as the show goes on. And our first couple of questions are survey questions, not worth points. We do want to give a big shout out and thank you to the National Park Service and the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield, Illinois, that helped us put this program together for all of you today. And we're going to check in from time to time with our experts for the day from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. So let's go ahead and just meet her.
Well, my name is Michelle Poe. I am the Director of Education here at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. We are located in Springfield, Illinois, and we interpret the life and times and legacy of Abraham Lincoln.
All right, so that's our expert today, Ms. Poe, and we'll be checking back in with her from time to time. But you're watching Geo Show USA edition, and even so, location matters. So where in the USA are we going today? Well, we're heading to the Midwest, and specifically, we're heading to two states today. So we're going to visit the state of Indiana, and we're going to travel to Lincoln's Boyhood National Memorial. So this is the location where Abraham Lincoln grew up from the age 7 to the age of 21. We're also going to visit the state next door, which is Illinois. In Illinois, we'll be talking about two locations today. First, we'll talk about New Salem. So today, New Salem is a state park. It was a small town when Abraham Lincoln was a young man in his 20s. It is no longer an active town. The town has died out, but they do have a state park there that you can visit. We'll also be visiting the state capital of Springfield, Illinois. And this is where Abraham Lincoln spent most of his life and most of his adult life. And this was his home. Abraham Lincoln's only home that he ever owned was in Springfield, Illinois. Those are the locations that we're visiting on today's Geo Show USA. Normally, we'll start off with some shout outs, but we don't have any currently today, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. and talk about young Abraham Lincoln. Young Lincoln's family consisted of his father, Thomas Lincoln, and his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Abraham had an older sister named Sarah. She was born on February 10th, 1807, and Abraham was born on February 12th, so very close in their birthdays, in 1809. So he was a little over 2 years younger than his sister. They also had a little brother that was born a few years later, but he died as an infant. And this is pretty common when we think about in the 1800s. So before modern medicine, childbirth was a risky business. All right, so we have our first survey question for today that we're going to skip. Okay, so Abraham spent the first 7 years of his life in Kentucky. He had 2 homes in Kentucky, and Kentucky at the time had land issues where there were often disputes. There were no set lines on a lot of the property. So his father actually, out of land disputes, lost 2 of his properties, and before moving to Indiana as a young boy. All right. And so in Indiana, young Abraham Lincoln moved after he was 7 years old, and he spent from the years 1817 to 1830, so until he was 21. So from age 7 to 21, he lived in Indiana. All right, so when they moved to Indiana, again, he had an older sister and his father and his mother. Now, this is pretty interesting when we're talking about the Lincolns and this time period. So his father here, Thomas Lincoln, we actually have a photograph of his father, but his mother, we only have a painting. So we only have a painting of Nancy Lincoln, and that's because photography was not invented until the 1800s, and his mother unfortunately died before photographs were invented. So we don't have a photograph, only paintings of his mother, but we actually have a photograph of his father. Unfortunately, about a year later, after moving to Indiana in 1818, his mother died of something called milk sickness. Now, milk sickness was a disease that was common in the frontier in the 1800s, and it came from drinking milk from cows that had eaten this plant called white snake roots. And can you guys say white snake roots? All right, so maybe we'll get us in a minute. And his mother, unfortunately, died at a young age of 35, and so it was just Thomas Lincoln, his father, Sarah, and Abraham. So it was just the 3 of them until a year later in 1819 when his father remarried. He married Sarah Bush. So Sarah Bush Lincoln, his stepmom, came into the family, and she brought 3 children with her. So he had 3 stepsisters and an older sister. So lots of sisters Abraham had. And fast forwarding a little bit from his time in Indiana, his sister died giving childbirth when she got married at the age of 21. So again, he had a little brother that did not make it past infancy, and his sister died as well. So childbirth was very risky in the 1800s, and that was common with many families, not just the Lincolns. So the Lincolns in 1830 moved to Illinois. So when Abraham Lincoln was 21 years old, he was a young man. He was 6'4" by this point, so very tall. He was 200 pounds. He was a very strong young man. In fact, one of his nicknames, he had many nicknames throughout his life, but one of them was the Rail Splitter. Can you guys say Rail Splitter? All right, and one of them, and another thing is he just really developed a love for reading as a young man in Indiana. In fact, he would walk miles sometimes just to find a book. So before we start learning a little bit more about young Lincoln, we do have a classroom that's joined us on camera, and they have a really jerky connection. All right, so let's see. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you,
So,
but I think I think on our end, I think it's the Wi-Fi that's really, really not working too well for us.
All right. So why don't you just why don't you try just turning off your camera, and maybe that will we'll just go with the audio, and I won't be able to see you, but you'll be able to see me. Maybe that will help. Okay.
I can hear you now. Go.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and continue on. Since you guys did jump in, if you didn't catch it earlier, we are using, if you're playing along with Kahoot today, that Kahoot pin is 430452. Again, that's 430452. All right, so we're going to continue to talk about young Abraham. And earlier, I think you may have missed it, but we introduced an expert from the Abraham Lincoln Library and Presidential Library in Springfield, Illinois. So Miss Poe, the Director of Education, and we're going to go to her next to continue our discussion with young Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, and then when he was little, he moved to Indiana. I believe he lived in Kentucky for about 5 years, and then he moved to Indiana. Like I said, he was pretty little, and he stayed there until he was a young man, until he was ready to go out into the world and live on his own. Abraham Lincoln's dad's name was Thomas, and his mother's name was Nancy. When they lived in Indiana, there was a disease going around where people were dying of something called milk sickness. And milk sickness comes when a cow eats a poisonous plant called snake root. And when you drink the milk from the cow that's eaten this plant, you get very, very sick. So Abraham Lincoln's mom actually died from that when he was young. And his father remarried, and he married a woman named Sarah Bush Johnson. And so she moved into their home in Indiana, and she brought her children with her. So he went to a much larger family, still in that one-room log cabin. Abraham Lincoln grew up very poor. His father was a carpenter and he was a farmer. And so they lived in a very rural part of Indiana. Most of their life was trying to get by. This was no grocery stores, no stores of any kind. They had some great distance between them and their neighbors. Abraham Lincoln didn't talk about his childhood very much, but when he did, it was very, you could tell it was a very isolating experience. He had probably about a total of about a year's education by the time he was a grown-up. That wasn't gotten all in any one stint. He went to school, bits and pieces. So he loved school. He loved learning. He would, there are stories of him walking miles to borrow books from people. He wanted to learn as much as he could, but he didn't have a lot of access to formal education. But it's believed he had a pretty contentious, not a calm experience, a relationship with his father. For example, when Thomas Lincoln died, Abraham Lincoln didn't go to the funeral. He didn't even come back for it. And so there was some love lost there. But when his stepmother came to live with them, she encouraged Thomas to let Abraham go to school. She encouraged his learning. She really fostered this love of learning and moving out into the world. And so I think both of them had an impact on him. His father maybe not necessarily for the positive, and his stepmother more so.
All right, so just a little more information about young Abraham Lincoln and his time in Indiana. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into our virtual tour and visit Southern Indiana. So again, we are visiting the location of the Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial. It's located in Southern Indiana. And I know you guys are from Illinois. Have any of you been to Indiana before?
No.
Okay, some yeses, some nos. Well, if you haven't, guess what? You're going there now, virtually that is. So we're going to visit the Abraham Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial. It's located in Lincoln, Indiana, so it's named after Lincoln. And we're going to visit the memorial, and we're going to start off at the Visitor Center. We're going to walk across the property. You're going to see this big flagpole that's right beside what's called the Pioneer Cemetery. And then we're going to head to the back of the property. So this is kind of a bird eye shot of where we're going to walk through. And the homestead, the Boyhood home, is where Abraham Lincoln's family, where their land was located. So abracadabra, we're now in Southern Indiana. So lots of agriculture and farm fields in southern Indiana. But when Abraham Lincoln moved here, it was all wilderness. In fact, years later, he wrote poems and stories about growing up in southern Indiana and talked about hearing the noises at nighttime. So the cougars and the bears and all sorts of animals at nighttime. And so this is the visitor center at the Boyhood Memorial. And so you can go in here, you can talk to park rangers. They have displays about Abraham Lincoln's life, what it was like here in southern Indiana in the early 1800s. So we're going to start walking to the other side of the property. Here's that flagpole I showed you. And this is the Pioneer Cemetery. So our key point or a key thing that we're going to highlight here is this headstone. So this is the headstone of Nancy Hanks. So this is Abraham's mother. Unfortunately, she died a year after moving to Indiana of milk sickness. And that's when his father remarried. And the rest of the time here, he had a stepmother that helped raise him. And again, as we learned earlier, she was very encouraging of Abraham Lincoln and to read. So now we're entering his homestead area. So he would have had crop fields. They were farmers. They were also carpenters. So they would have built things for local neighbors. And right here in the 1930s, this location was found, or refound, I should say, and this is the casting of the foundation of Abraham Lincoln's one-room cabin that he lived in southern Indiana. So again, the wood, this is not the original wood, so they took a casting of the wood and of the fireplace. So once they dug it up and they took the casting, the original wood is gone now. But if we draw a line right across here, you can see, you know, from front to back and left to right, this is not a very big place. Can you guys imagine living in the small one-room cabin with 4 sisters and a dad and a stepmom? Can you imagine that? Right? So that's a lot of people to live in one small cabin. But, you know, this is common on the frontier in the 1800s of Indiana, places like Illinois, where you guys are from. So there would have been small rural places and lots of small families, and the Lincolns were not wealthy. So they were a poor family and just local farmers that lived in the area. So this homestead that we're looking at, so this is a recreated cabin of, again, the location we were just looking at was the original location. So this is right beside there. This is a recreated cabin. That means the National Park Service, they rebuilt it to what the Lincolns may have lived in, because we didn't have a picture of his cabin, but this is what log cabins would have looked like during the time. So you would have had a fireplace and just a one-room cabin. And as we get a look around some of the property, you get to see you know, there are gaps in between the boards. They would have raised animals, so they would have had some cows and chickens and other farm animals as well. They would have grown crops, and they were also carpenters, so they would have built cabinets and other small wood things. Now, this is in the library. Even though we're talking about Indiana, this is in the Presidential Library in Springfield, because in the library, the museum there, they recreated the cabin as well, the inside of it. So we're going to go check out what the inside may have looked like when Abraham Lincoln lived in Indiana. So inside that one-room cabin, we see Abraham there reading, and we just see one bed. So if you can imagine, there would have been one bed for the parents. And it's kind of hard to see because it's dark, so I'm going to highlight it for you. Let me get a better color that will show up. And if you see these, that's kind of better. Let's see. Let's see yellow. Yeah, yellow works. If everyone sees, these are kind of like pieces of wood that are sticking out of the wall. What do you think those are used for? Does anyone have a guess? It's kind of like a ladder. So there's a little loft up there. So these just big pegs that stick out. So Abraham would just climb up into the loft, and that's where he would sleep. And the other children may have slept on the floor right there. Now, Abraham would read. He would stay up reading by firelights. And Abraham Lincoln, when he learned to read, which was common in the 1800s, he learned to read out loud. And so his entire life, he always read out loud. So that's pretty funny. So even as a 50-year-old man, he would read out loud always. So that's a fun fact about Abraham Lincoln and reading. All right, and that was his boyhood home located in Indiana. And we'll go ahead and pause right there and open up the floor for any questions that you guys may have. So let's go ahead and stop right there. And do you guys have any questions about young Abraham Lincoln living in Indiana? So let's go over to Illinois. What do you guys think? You guys have a question?
How tall was Lincoln when he was a man?
When he was a man, so by the time they left Indiana and they moved to Illinois, he was 6'4". So he was pretty tall. If he lived today, he may be a basketball player. He was pretty tall. Great question. All right, and you guys have another one, and it looks like you guys are the only ones with us today. So line them up. It's all about you guys today. So if you have questions, shoot them.
How old was Lincoln when he moved there?
Right. So when he left Indiana, so I think you guys missed the beginning. So he was actually born in Kentucky. He was born in Kentucky, and he lived in Kentucky until he was 7. When he was 7, he moved to Indiana, and that's where he spent most of his childhood. So from 7 to 21. At age 21, he moved to Illinois. And we'll pick up the story in a minute, and I'll tell you where he lived. He lived in a couple of places in Illinois. All right, great question. Let's do one more.
Why did Abraham Lincoln want to move to Indiana?
Well, it wasn't necessarily Abraham's choice. It was the family. So Thomas Lincoln moved his family to so why did they want to move to Indiana or away from Indiana? Okay, to Indiana. Okay, so to Indiana. So this is, I do know the specifics behind this. So Indiana was a new territory. So we have to look at the history. So at the time, the country was moving west. So Indiana was not a state. Illinois was not a state. And Kentucky had already been established. But because of you may have seen this at home. Maybe at home you see in your yard on the corner, sometimes there's stakes hammered into the ground or poles hammered into the ground. Those are what we call survey markings. So there was no real surveys done in Kentucky. People just went out there and said, this is my land, this is my land. And so because of that, there would be arguments. Whose land crossed whose land. And sometimes people would have disagreements. And Thomas Lincoln actually was in a court battle or a court case with someone said, Thomas Lincoln said he owned this land, another person said he owned that land, and it was a big ugly mess. And so the Lincolns just picked up and moved to Indiana. Because Indiana at the time, it was surveyed by the US government, so it was all the surveyings were if you had that land, you knew it was yours. And so they actually moved there in Indiana. So that's the story of why they moved there. Great question. So we're going to go ahead and continue on, and we'll pick up that story of why or what happened when Abraham moved to Illinois. All right, so Abraham Lincoln lived in Illinois for 31 years. So that means he spent the majority of his life in Illinois. So shout out to Illinois over there. And so he spent from the age 21 to 52, he lived in Illinois. And from 52 to 56, so for 4 years, just over 4 years, he lived in Washington, D.C. So when he left Illinois, he never returned. Does anyone know why he never returned alive?
Go. Come on, Sierra. Yes. Tell him why he didn't return.
Because he died.
Right, he did die. So he was assassinated. That means he was killed as president, and but he did return to Illinois. He's buried in Illinois, so he is in Illinois today. Is where his tomb is, and maybe if we have time, I'll show you at the end of the show. So, okay, so we're at Illinois. So the Lincolns picked up from Indiana and they moved to Illinois in 1830. And Lincoln, he did not have a good relationship with his father, Thomas. So at that point, he left home. He was a full-grown man, 6'4" tall, 200 pounds, big man, and he left and he went to work on the Mississippi River. So he did a couple of runs down to New Orleans, but he did this for about a year, and then he came back and he moved to a town called New Salem. And New Salem, he spent 7 years in New Salem from 1831 to 1837. And then from New Salem, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, and he lived for 24 years in Springfield, Illinois. So that's where he spent most of his life, was in Springfield. So how old was he? So he was 21 when he worked on the Mississippi. He lived in New Salem from 22 to 28. And New Salem today is no longer an active town, but it is a state park. Have any of you guys been to New Salem State Park? No? Okay. So New Salem State Park is kind of like the Boyhood Memorial, where it's not an active town. People don't live there any longer. It's a state park. But what it is, these are reconstructed buildings. That means historians, they have rebuilt these small buildings to look like New Salem did when Abraham Lincoln lived there. And so what was he doing in New Salem? Well, he was a store owner. He owned 2 stores in New Salem. So this is the rebuilt store. And he had a partner named Barry. So this was the Barry and Lincoln store. And they moved locations to a second store. And this is his second store. And so you use your imagination a little bit. And I could use my imagination and see big old tall 6'4". I'm a very good artist, by the way. 6'4" Lincoln sitting out here on the store waving hello to people as they go by. And so what did he do? Well, he ran a general store. And a general store on the frontier or small towns in Illinois in the 1600s. Okay, this was like a small Walmart in one little store. That's what a general store is. So you just get almost anything. So tools, a bucket, if you needed some fabric or yarn, maybe some sugar, generally items that you could not make yourself on a homestead. You know, so you're not going to buy things like butter and eggs and things like that at a general store, because these were all farmers that lived in the area, and you could raise those things yourself on your own land. So really hard to get stuff like maybe coffee or sugar, okay? But Abraham Lincoln did many things in his 20s. So he did not do just the store thing. He at one time, he was a postmaster in New Salem, so that's like the mailman. He was a surveyor in New Salem. He got into politics, so he served his first term at the Illinois General Assembly, representing New Salem. And the biggest thing that he did was, it's a funny story. He bought a trunk, just a random trunk he bought. It was at at an estate sale. So an estate sale is kind of like a big yard sale when someone dies and the family doesn't want everything, so that you kind of have like a big yard sale. Well, back then, your estate usually was just like a trunk. And he bought a trunk at an estate sale, and in there it had a law book. And he actually taught himself to be a lawyer. Can you imagine that? How hard it is to teach yourself to be a lawyer? So he did not go to school for it. It was all self-taught. And after New Salem, he moved to Springfield. So from 28 to 52 years old, he lived in Springfield. And that's going to bring us to our survey question of the day, or our second survey question. And that question, bring up our Kahoot screen for you guys. So if you're playing along, go ahead and get logged in. That game pin is 430452. We're going to skip the first question, or you can answer it if you want, because we missed that earlier. We'll do them both. So the first survey question is, where was Abraham Lincoln born? Where was he born? Was it red Kentucky, blue Indiana, yellow Washington, D.C., or green Illinois? All right, great job, guys. It was Kentucky. So here's the one we're talking about now, though. Next survey question. Before he was president, Abraham Lincoln what was his job in Springfield? Was it red, he was an author, blue, a doctor, yellow, a teacher, or green, was he a lawyer? All right, he was a lawyer. Great job, guys. And we're going to go ahead and find out. So what was his life like in Springfield as a lawyer? So in Springfield, again, he was a lawyer. He was a very successful lawyer as well. So at first, he would ride around the district. So here we see Abraham Lincoln. This is a illustration or sketch of him riding around what's called the 8th District at the time, which was a big district. So he spent weeks at a time away from home. So lots of time the kids were left alone back in Springfield. He was riding around meeting with clients, and this is his law office. So it's still in Springfield. So if you ever go to Springfield today, have you guys ever been to Springfield?
Yeah.
All right. So have you ever been to the old courthouse in Springfield?
Old courthouse, anybody been there? No.
The legislator building right in the middle? Well, right across the street from the legislator in Springfield also had the courthouse in the legislator. And right across the street is still there today is the Lincoln and Herndon law offices. And so you can still see that today all these years later. So Lincoln met his wife. So his wife was Mary Todd Lincoln, and he met her in Springfield, and they had 4 children. So they were all boys. They had Robert Todd, Edward, Willie, and Thomas Lincoln, which he was also called Tad. Now, unfortunately, all of them died. The 3 younger boys died before reaching the age of 18, some of them very young. So only Robert Todd reached an adult. And so lots of tragedy with the Lincoln family. And this was their home in Springfield, Illinois, still there today. You can visit it, and you guys are going to visit it today on our virtual field trip. And just another quick note is when Abraham Lincoln, this is a painting that was made of him leaving for Washington, D.C. And so when he left for Washington, D.C., he never returned to Springfield, Illinois. All right, so we're going to start our virtual tour as soon as they get logged back in. So if anyone's watching a recording, we'll go straight over to some of our fun facts for the day before our classroom gets back live with us. But some fun facts about Lincoln as an adult. One is his stovetop hats. So these hats were named, which he was famous for wearing, they were named after stovepipes. All right. All right, you guys get logged back in with us, and we'll go ahead and we're gonna head down to Springfield, and we're going to go to that famous adult's home of Abraham Lincoln. So again, Abraham Lincoln, this is the only home that he ever owned. Now, when he bought it, we see it today, it's a 2-story home. When he bought it, it was a 1-story home. So they actually expanded the home. They built a second level to it and built out behind it as well. And they also built this wall in the front, that brick wall. So at first it was just kind of a muddy yard on the corner there. And so this is what we're going to look at. So this is the floor plan. I'm going to show you the direction we're going to move through the house. So we're going to enter in the front of the house. We're going to walk through the parlor. Now the parlor was an area that you were not allowed in as a kid. So none of the boys were allowed in the parlor. The parlor could be opened up into one giant room that they could host political parties, or he could close it off. So he had a door that he could close off the back parlor. And this is where Lincoln would often read. This is where he read a lot of his law books and worked on things at home. And then we're going to get a look at the dining room and then through the family room. So this is where the kids would hang out and play, and Abraham would read to the kids. Then we're going to go up to the second level, so the second floor of the house, and we're going to get a quick look at the guest bedroom. We'll see in Abraham Lincoln's bedroom and Mary Todd's bedroom. So why would a mother and a father have two separate rooms? Why did they have two separate rooms? Do you guys have a guess?
Yes, yes.
What do you think?
Because maybe the bed wasn't big enough for both of them.
Well, it could be, but that's a great thought process. But maybe, like, I would go the other way, is because they had a pretty good life. So Abraham Lincoln made pretty good money. He was a successful lawyer, and it was a status thing. So when we talk about status, usually it's people, especially in politics and especially in the 1800s, it's kind of like the more money you have, the higher your status is in society. And to some regards, you know, that's still true today. And so what happened is they tried to show their status. And if in the 1800s, if you could afford a house that had two bedrooms, a his and a her bedroom, and you were living well off in the 1800s. Let me just say that. So it was part of a status, a show of status. So we're going to not only see Abraham and Mary Todd's bedroom, but we'll see the boys' small room. And Mary Todd often had help or a worker with them in the house. So let's go ahead and do it. So let's go to Springfield. So have any of you guys ever been to the Lincoln home?
Who's been to the Lincoln home? Yes, you have? Okay.
Some of you? Okay. So I'm going to pause it right here. And so what would it have looked like, or might have looked like, when Abraham Lincoln lived here in the 1800s? Well, first of all, these streets right here, you would have seen horses or carriages going up and down the streets, because remember, there's no cars during this time. Also, you would have seen livestock. So it seems weird to us today, maybe in Springfield, to see a cow or chicken walking down the road in the middle of Springfield today. But during the time of Lincoln, that would have been a common sight to see. And let's go ahead and walk into the front door. So right when we walk into the front door, if you've ever been here, or when you go, if you haven't been yet, so when you go in, they're going to tell you to stay right here on this rug, this blue rug that runs all through the house. And so they don't want you to stand on these areas. And the reason they do that is because they're trying to protect the home. So many of the items in the home are original. And we'll take a look at some of those items. And so right when you walk in, a couple of things that is not original. First of all, these banisters here, these railings, these are to keep people moving in a certain flow around the house. So these would not have been here when the Lincolns were here. So you could walk down this hallway. Today, they're just protecting that small hallway. This is the stairs. We'll go up the stairs in a minute, but we're going to check out the first floor. So let's walk to the left and go into the parlor. So this is the parlor. Remember, there's two portions, a front and a back. And all the furniture, all the horsehair chairs that you see, all that is original, and except the wallpaper. So all the wallpaper in the house is not original wallpaper. However, it is original. It's a copy of the original. So there were original pieces of the wallpaper, and they copied them, and they made replicas. So this is a door right here. Remember that Lincoln could close off the back parlor if he wanted to. And let's take a look at the back parlor. So this is a sofa, a horsehair sofa, and you can imagine Lincoln laying down, reading out loud his law books when he lived here. And this is the dining room, so the family would eat here. You can see some of their china. And this is the family room. So this is where the family spent most of their time. And Lincoln would read to his kids here. They had a dog named Fido that would hang out here, and lots of cats. Lincoln would take in cats from the street. And also, right here on the table, it's kind of hard to see because it's kind of dark. They keep the windows closed to kind of protect all the cloth things in the house. But right here is this right here was like the peak of home entertainment. So this was like an Xbox of the 1800s or big screen TV. And what this is a stereoscope. Can you guys say stereoscope?
Stereoscope.
Okay, so what a stereoscope is, and I guarantee you some of you have probably used something similar. Have you guys used Google Cardboard or anything like that at school?
No.
No? Have you seen it? Do you know what I'm talking about, though? The VR
Yes.
glasses?
Yes.
Right?
The
So,
VR glasses and the cell phones inside. And
right.
virtual
So,
reality.
if any of you have seen that on TV, on a commercial, or maybe one of your friends has, you've seen one, like on Google Cardboard, or even you can download the app. You don't even need the viewers. But what happens if I draw my little smartphone right here? What happens if I have an iPhone? If you download an app, and even without the goggles, what you see is you see two pictures, two videos that play side by side. That's how this works. This is a stereoscope. Scope. It's the same technology that they had in the mid-1800s that people are using today with VR goggles. So instead of moving video, these were still photographs, and it would be two pictures side by side. And what happens is it offsets a little bit, and when you look at it in a viewer, it makes it look like a 3D image. So you can look at 3D images of the Great Pyramids of Egypt or other places around the world. And we're doing the same thing today with our smartphones and Google Cardboard or other VR headsets. And so the Lincolns had one of those machines. And let's go upstairs and check out the upstairs. So upstairs here, this is the guest bedroom. And let me go back here, and I like to quiz everyone on this. Does anyone know what this metal object is along the wall? Do you guys have any guesses?
What? A fireplace. Say fireplace. That's the thing.
Fireplace.
Right, it is well, it's close to a fireplace. A fireplace would be if this was an open area with a open fire in it. But this is called a wood stove. What's it called?
Wood stove.
So a wood stove is kind of like a fireplace. And what a wood stove is I'm going to go back to it, don't worry. So a wood stove is right there. It has a door on the front. So it's kind of like a cabinet that's made of metal. So you make a fire inside of here, and you close the door. And what it does is it makes the fire burn slow, and it gets really super hot. So it gives off heat. So in Illinois in the 1800s, there was no indoor heating and air conditioning without using wood stoves. So this is how they would heat their home. So every room had a wood stove in it. So now we're in Abraham Lincoln's room. You can see his wood stove right here in front of us. We'll go back and look at it. This one you can actually see the pipe going back into the wall that would let the smoke out. But here, this is all original furniture. The desk here, this is funny. Can you imagine 6'4" Abraham Lincoln sitting at this desk right here? Let's draw his top hat. Big old tall Abe. Probably didn't wear his hat inside. That's bad manners. But big old tall Abe would be sitting there at his desk. All the carpet and wallpaper are reproductions. That means they're copies of the original, so they're not the original, but the wardrobe's original. Here's his bed. And this is in Mary Todd's room. So Mary Todd, once the kids were born, they would stay in the room here. When it was a one-story house, it would be in the back parlor was the bedroom. But the kids would stay here until they got old enough to go live in their old room. And here we get to see Mary Todd's wood stove. And here's an interesting piece right here. And this is a wooden seat with a hole in it. Does anyone have a guess? What is this odd-looking thing? Any guesses?
Yes.
Bathroom. A toilet.
Right. So it is. This is a toilet of the mid 1800s, a kind of fancy toilet, because most people, if we see right here, over here to the left, most people at nighttime, so you used a bathroom outside in the 1800s and an outhouse. And at nighttime, if you didn't want to go to the outhouse at 2 o'clock in the morning when you woke up to use the bathroom, you would use something called a bedpan. So you would use the bathroom in a pan, and you would slide it under your bed. And the next morning, you would go outside and dump it out. And it sounds gross today, but this is how you did it back then. And here, this was a fancy seat. So instead of squatting over a pan, This was an actual seat that was made, and this area down here was open, so you slide your pan under that hole, and you do your business, and the next morning you take that pan outside and you dump it out. So you're right, that is a toilet. Great job, guys. All right, so let's head across the hall and take a look at the kids' room. So here's the kids' room. Can you imagine here, 4 boys living in one small room, and here's a wash station. So just like the toilet, there was no running water to wash your hands, so you would have to go outside to the well, fill up the pitcher, bring it inside, fill up the bowl, wash up for dinner. So that's how it worked in the 1800s. We can see some blocks and checkers back there. Would have been some toys that they had. And this is the workers' room. So remember that bedpan that I was talking about? So we get to see one here. This is where most people would keep theirs. So only Mary Todd had the fancy seat. Abraham and the boys would have bedpans as well. And this is downstairs in the kitchen before we walk outside. And again, this is a wood stove as well, but this is a larger one for cooking. So as we can see here, big old fancy wood stove. And that would get you can imagine how hot that kitchen would get. And here's their outhouse. And not many people had an outhouse with 3 seats in it. The reason they had an outhouse with 3 seats in it is because they would host big political parties. And you can see there's a little bit of gap in between the wall on each side. From the left and the right and the front and the back. So ladies of the time, when you went to a big political party and you were in higher society, you would wear big hoop skirts, and they would fit down around these seats here when they needed to go use the bathroom. And that is the Abraham Lincoln home in Springfield, Illinois. So again, this is a model. You can kind of get an idea of what the outside area looks like. So the outhouse was located out here in the back, and again, it was a 1-story home when they first got it. All right, so let's go ahead and check out. We have another piece of information from our expert, Mrs. Poe.
When he thought about what he wanted to do and what he wanted to become, there's indication that he didn't want to be, a farmer. He wanted to do something other than that. But I don't know that Abraham Lincoln knew where he wanted to go. I think as soon as he knew he could be president, he wanted to be president, but that didn't come until he was an adult. When Abraham Lincoln moved to Illinois, he ended up in a small town named New Salem. While he was there, he was a postmaster, he worked in a store, he was a surveyor, he had a lot of different roles. When he was living in New Salem, he was studying law. He decided he wanted to become a lawyer. He was a self-taught lawyer, something I can't even imagine doing today. And so he studied, he took the bar, but there wasn't going to be enough law business for him in New Salem, so he moved to Springfield, Illinois, a larger town not that far away. When he came to Springfield, he was a lawyer. He was part of a few different legal practices. His final law practice was the Lincoln Herndon Law Office, but he spent many years riding the circuit, so he would travel around throughout central Illinois, being a lawyer and following the court cases there. So he was away from home, away from Springfield for big parts of his life. Abraham Lincoln was a very successful lawyer. He argued more than 400 cases before the Supreme Court in Illinois. Part of that is his law office was located right across from where the Supreme Court was. So he had great proximity. They say real estate is everything. He had great positioning.
So earlier I was talking about the state courthouse and the legislator. So this is what it looks like. So this is across the street from the law offices that I showed you earlier, and it's a very beautiful building. So I highly recommend it. If you guys go to Springfield, check it out. And this is the actual courtroom inside of the legislator. So again, we see a wood stove right here, even in courtrooms, all inside buildings. This is how you had to heat buildings back then. And so you can imagine this would be an area that Abraham Lincoln argued many, many court cases in this very room.
Proximity. They say real estate is everything. He had great positioning when he was practicing law. and he was very good at it. He was very good at speaking to the jury. He didn't use a lot of fancy language that would confuse them. He spoke sort of the everyman term to sway them, and he was known as being a really, really shrewd arguer. The story is he would concede every point you made until the last one. He would just obliterate your argument. So he was very good at defending his position. He got married after he moved to Springfield. He married a woman named Mary Todd. The two of them were both very, very passionate about politics. We talked about how Abraham Lincoln didn't necessarily know when he was little that he wanted to be president. Mary Lincoln knew she wanted to be Mrs. President. She had very strong political aspirations. And one of my favorite stories actually is the two of them when they met. He was at a dance, and he sort of saw her and she saw him, and she was telling a story later of meeting him, and she said, he came up and he said, "I would like to dance with you in the worst way." And she told her friend, he did. He danced in the worst way. He was a terrible dancer. So I think that's pretty cute. They had 4 children. Only one survived into adulthood, but Abraham and Mary had 4 children. They were 4 boys. One passed away here in Springfield. One passed away in the White House, and then Tad passed away after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So only their firstborn, Robert, lived to be an adult. After Abraham Lincoln left, he never came back. He went to go be president. He even told Herndon, his law partner, "Leave my name on the door, leave my name on the building. I want it to be here when I get back." But he did not come back, not alive anyway.
All right, and so this is a final shot of his casket when when he died. They brought him back to Springfield, Illinois. His tomb is in Springfield today, and this is where they had it displayed at the courthouse, where the building I was just showing you, so people could come visit the president. The train went across the country. People lined up along the train tracks to pay their respects to President Lincoln when he was brought back to Illinois. All right, so that is Abraham Lincoln and an overview of him as an adult before he was the president of the United States. And let's go ahead and open up the floor for any questions that we have. So let's go ahead over to you guys in Illinois. Do we have any questions about Abraham Lincoln?
Yes. Who else has a question?
Is it true that Abraham Lincoln died after being kicked by a horse? Here, I'm gonna bring up here. This is one of the fun facts. It's kind of some extra goodies I have for you guys. So the story goes like this. So Abraham Lincoln, he said he died for a short bit. I don't think he really died. So what happened is, let me bring up a picture I have for you. So Abraham Lincoln, so the story is when he lived in Indiana, he took the way you would get your corn crushed up. So you would go to like a mill. So a mill would generally be a big stone, and you would hook your horse or mule up to it, and they would walk that big hundreds and hundreds pound stone wheel around, and you would lay out your corn in front of it, and it would crush it. So that's how you made cornmeal. And so he put his horse on this thing and hooked it up, and he was walking it, and he actually got kicked in the forehead. And years later, Abraham said that he died for a short period of time. I don't think he really died. I think he got knocked out. But some people say, if you look at all his photographs, that one of his eyes was kind of lazy, a little bit cross-eyed, and that may have happened from getting kicked in the head by a horse. Great fun facts that you found there. Awesome. Do we have any other questions?
Okay, Anthony? Hey, move, honey. Anthony's got a question.
Why did Abraham move to Springfield instead of some other place? Right? That's a great question, isn't it?
It is a great question, and the reason is because that's where the courthouse was. That's where most of the big court cases were. And remember, he just passed the bar. Means the bar is the test to be a lawyer. So he just passed the test to become a lawyer, and he lived in a little bitty town called New Salem. If you're a lawyer, there's not a lot going on there. So he wanted to make money. So he moved to where the courthouse was, which is what many lawyers do. Usually in the county that you live in in Illinois. There's probably the courthouse of your county. Most of the lawyers in your county probably live pretty close to there, or at least within driving distance. But remember, this is before cars, so you want to live really close to the courthouse because that's where you spend a lot of your time. Great question there. We're going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and play our Kahoots quiz for the day. And don't worry. And if you still have questions, we'll come back to it afterwards, just so in case you guys do have to move on. One question on there, you guys joined a little bit late, so you may have missed it, but Abraham Lincoln's birthday is on February 12th. When is Abraham Lincoln's birthday? Okay, February 12th is his birthday. Hey, fun fact, everyone, today is my birthday. All right, so thank you. You can send me lots of gifts. All right, so we're going to go ahead and grab your Kahoots, and we're going to play today's Geo quiz. All right, guys, make sure you're quick with your little digits. Where was Abraham Lincoln born? Was it red, Kentucky, blue, Illinois, or green, Indiana? All right, it was in Kentucky. So Eli is leading. Great job. Okay, next question. How did Lincoln's mother die? Right. Was it old age, red, blue the flu, or yellow milk sickness? All right, it was milk sickness. Great job, everyone. All right, are you guys gonna let them win? Still have the same leader. Next question: how many children did Lincoln have? Was it red 1, blue 2, yellow 4, or green 3? All right, great job, guys. It is 4. He had 4 children. All right, it's close. Chloe's trying to catch him. All right, next question. Where was Lincoln's only home he ever owned? The only one he ever owned. Was it red, New Salem, Illinois, Pigeon Creek, Indiana, Springfield, Illinois, or Washington, D.C.? All right, it was Springfield. Ooh, okay, last question. When is Lincoln's birthday? When is Lincoln's birthday? Is it red, February 12th, blue, January 12th, yellow, January 20th, or green, February 20th? All right, and today's winner is dun 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 dun. He left on the time. All right, great job, great job. All right, so don't forget to send me your address over at learnaroundtheworld.com/prize, and I'll get your prize, a postcard from me to you, my birthday postcard to you. I'm giving you gifts on my birthday. All right, so do you guys have any questions? Go ahead and send them up if you got them.
I have a fun fact that when Abraham Lincoln did not have beer, he wasn't the president, but when he had the beer, then he became president.
Yeah, you're right. So he did not have a beard. And I want to say, I'll continue this fun fact. I want to say that I was reading about when he was going to Washington, D.C., because it took a long time back then. There were no airplanes. You had to take a train and would stop at every little town on the way. And this little girl that he met encouraged him to grow a beard. She wrote him a letter that said, basically, you would look better if you grew a beard. And so he grew a beard. So it's kind of fun fact right there. Great one. I love it. All right. Do we have any other questions, fun facts, or other?
He kept important papers in his hat.
Right, he did keep important papers in his hat. So, great fun fact there. It was one of the fun facts I had that I love to show as well, because he's famous for wearing that big old, they're called a stovepipe hat. And the reason they were called stovepipe hats is if you look at the back of that
wood stove I showed you, they have a stove pipe coming out of the wood stove. And so those hats look like a big old tall long stove pipe. And that's kind of where they get their names, those hats from. And so if I bring up a couple other fun facts I have for you guys about Abraham Lincoln as an adult in Springfield, and they are one about that hat, because remember, we said he rode all over the 8th district of Illinois, so it's one of the biggest districts. So he spent a lot of time riding around in Illinois. And so remember, roads back then were dusty and muddy, and these hats were made out of beaver pelt, so they were waterproof. So you could keep papers, important papers, in these hats. So he had a little pocket on the inside of the hat where he would stick important legal papers in. Another fun fact about Lincoln as an adult, did you know that he's the only president to ever have a patent? So a patent is, do you guys know what a patent is? Okay, so a patent is if you invent something. Let's say if I invented the iPhone, right, or the smartphone. So if you invent something, you can apply for what's called a patent. So a patent is you apply for it with the U.S. government, and if you're an approved inventor of a certain object, and you get a patent for it. That means if anyone else wants to make that item, they have to pay you for it. They have to pay you the rights of it. So, he's the only president to ever invent anything and to get a patent for inventing it. And this is what he invented. So if you remember, when he was 21, he worked a year on the Mississippi River, and he spent a lot of time on the Ohio River in Indiana as a child as well. And so he spent a lot of time on boats and rivers. And one of the problems with rivers, especially when the water gets low, in fact, this is how he ended up in New Salem. He was on a small river that connected to the Mississippi, and they ran their boat aground, and they walked off into the shore of New Salem, and Lincoln said, you know what, I'm just going to stay here. That's why he decided to move to New Salem. Well, he built this, he made this patent. If you see right here, it looks like a little accordion. Well, it's just like big airbags. So if you were in a low river and you ran onto a sandbar, you could inflate these airbags, and it would lift your boat higher in the water, so it would be easier to get off of the sandbar. And so that was his invention that he invented. Pretty cool fun fact about Lincoln there. All right, so let's go. Looks like we have another question. Go ahead and shoot it.
Enrique, do you have a question? Who has a question? Come on, Ella. Last one. Last question. This is it. We gotta go.
Where did his wife work? Like, what did his wife do? Or job?
You know what? I don't think she worked. I think she was at home. I'll have to go. I'm going to research that one. I'll put my answer to that because I don't know the full answer. I know when she was the first lady, she was not working. Her job was she was entertaining. So she would have big political parties in Washington, D.C. So I'll see if I can find that answer for you. I'll post it at Flipgrid on our Abraham Lincoln topic string. So thanks a bunch, guys, for hanging out today. I hope you learned a little bit more about your hometown president or home state president, Abraham Lincoln. And have a great day, guys.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Bye. Thank you.